Hey everybody, this is one of the most common questions that we get from people that are moving from the acoustic world into the electric world. Which electric violin is going to sound the most like my acoustic? And the electric player in me wants to push back and say, they're two different instruments and they're supposed to sound different. But I do understand the question. I understand the question. It's not a dumb question. If you understand where it's coming from, it does make sense. So let's have this discussion. I think the most important thing to do is to ask the question, what do you mean when you say it sounds like an acoustic? Can you define what it is that you're looking for? Each person's ear is listening for something different. It could mean a number of things. But when it's a little hard to say, I don't know, like my acoustic. One trick that I got from my friend Dr. David Wallace at Berklee College of Music is if you're having a hard time defining one thing, why don't you try to define the opposite? What sounds are we trying to avoid with an electric violin? What are those sounds? And if you ask that question, you will often hear these types of things here. If, I don't want it to sound like that kid sounded in the Kmart parking lot that was playing Despacito on these cheap, crappy speakers. Yeah, I feel you. I don't want to sound like that either. So if we look at what the top 7 causes are, in my mind, for bad sound, that's going to help us figure out how to get the good acoustic sound that we want out of an electric violin. And there will be some examples in just a minute for you of some instruments that we have, but I want to set the stage a little bit. So some of the top causes of bad sound, the player is the most important factor. I can't help you with that. That's going to be up to you. Despite what you may have heard on another YouTube channel from some guys who don't play electric violin is not easier to play. It's a little bit different. There are some different factors that come into play. It is not easier. Don't expect to grab one of these and to sound like, Stravinsky on the thing. It's not. It isn't like that. So the player is the most important factor. Probably the most important factor after that is going to be the electronics. And that means the pickup, the preamp, the effects, the amp, the speaker, everything in the signal chain matters. So when we talk about that, we want to make sure that you're getting a violin that is going to create a pleasing organic sound. We're going to have a violin that does not make all those bad sounds that we talked about a minute ago. The good news is none of these instruments are going to make that bad sound when they're plugged into the right thing. You got to start with the source, and that's why we don't sell any of those cheap, crappy violins that you see on other sites. Sometimes people are like, man, I've only got a $200 budget. And I'm like, man, I feel you. I'm a touring musician. I know what budgets are like, but I can't sell you an instrument that's going to sound good for $200 because nobody makes one. There is no polishing, you can't fix a bad source. So you want to make sure you have a quality instrument. You want to make sure you have a quality setup, which is why we give a free setup on all these instruments. We want to make sure the bridge curvature, the string height, the spacing at the nut, the spacing at the bridge, that it feels good in your hands and gives you a fighting chance of getting a good sound. This is another big one. Impedance. An impedance mismatch is maybe one of the biggest causes of a quality violin not sounding like a quality violin. If you don't know what impedance is, I'm going to put up a link to a video here. The very first thing that you plug into has to be willing to accept the type of signal that an electric violin creates. And it's quite different from the signal an electric guitar creates, and most of this gear is designed for electric guitars. The biggest issue is impedance. An impedance mismatch is going to create these types of sounds. They're not going to sound good. They're definitely not going to sound acoustic. We want to make sure that we're choosing the right amp to plug into. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about, I want the warmth that comes from tubes. And okay, tube warmth is literally distortion though. So if you are going to try to get that tube warmth, you want to make sure not all tubes are created equal, and less is going to be more on that. If you're looking for an acoustic sound, going after it with a tube could be a little bit tricky. Consider the voicing on the amplifier that you're wanting to use. The frequency responses are published for most of these amps. You're going to want to avoid peaks in the 2K to 5K range. Here is an example of a frequency response. Don't worry about the two like sort of smoother lines on the bottom. That's a different thing. The sort of more like wavier line that's at the top. See the big push there around 3 or 4K? Just based on that graph alone, I would probably say that would not be my first choice to plug a violin into. That 3 to 5K range is where all that that's where all that comes from. Gain staging. Everything in your signal chain is expecting a certain signal strength, and it's putting out a certain signal strength. If you start starving one pedal from the one before it, or if you're overdriving a pedal from the one before it, none of this is going to help you sound more acoustic. So make sure that your gain staging is not a problem, or you're not going to have a fighting chance of getting a nice acoustic sound. EQ is the other thing. I would say generally a good player on good gear, your EQ should be relatively flat. Probably 8 times out of 10, your EQ is, there aren't going to be any large adjustments in there. And also 8 times out of 10, subtractive EQ is going to be the thing. You're going to want to cut frequencies rather than boost them. That's just some general knowledge there. We've got a video on that. I'll put up a link. Hopefully that's going to help you. All right, Matt, you've been talking for 6 minutes. I don't have an answer yet on which one of these violins sounds more like an acoustic. Tone is very personal. Each person is listening for something different. Every single one of these violins, I've had somebody tell me, oh, that's the most acoustic sounding violin in the shop. So I can't necessarily tell you what your ear is going to look for. So I'm going to play 5 different violins in alphabetical order by manufacturer. Every one of these, I've had somebody tell me it is the most acoustic sounding violin they've ever heard. So your ear can be the judge on that, and I'll be right back. All right, so your ear can judge which one sounds the most acoustic to you. To me, they all have the same characteristics that an acoustic has. They're warm, they're woody, they're organic, they're clear, they're clean, there's no distortion in any of those. I would say that all of those have a lot of the same characteristics that an acoustic does, but maybe one of them is going to speak to you more than another one will. And that's kind of where we can help you. If you want to call us or email us, info@electricviolinshop.com. We can try to talk you through some of that process. As always, mash subscribe on that thing. Click some other videos. Keep the algorithm popping. And, have a juicy day. I hope it's fantastic for you.